diving right in, I think I've had some limited experience with, crossing the bridge between the world of publishing that I've known for a long time. So kind of academic journals, 12,000 words, that kind of process, and then writing for serious public facing academic magazines and newspapers. And I know that I'm hooked, not only because it's really wonderful to get work out there, but even more so because the editing process is so much more hands-on, and I learn a lot as a writer. And that's kind of what this is about for someone who was in my shoes not long ago, about how to cross that bridge. And so maybe the first question would be, if I put myself in the shoes of someone who's working on something, in this case related to, let's say, technology, and what questions should they ask themselves? What sort of checklist should they go through in their mind to try to figure out whether or not they've got something which maybe they might consider pitching to an MIT technology review, or to, a serious public facing magazine or journal or newspaper more broadly?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I really do think the first step is figuring out what you have to say. And so, that might be very related to the research that you're doing or a project that you're working on at that moment. But a lot of times it involves, taking something that you know really well and then also connecting it with something going on in the world at that moment that other people outside of your world in academia or your department are also thinking about and trying to figure out for themselves. And I think for me, that's often kind of what helps a pitch or an idea raise to the level of us wanting to work with an author and work together to publish it. It's an idea that is very, the author has deep research and expertise and insight on this topic because they've been studying it for so long, which is wonderful. And they can bring that perspective and analysis to the piece. But there's also some broader interest in the topic for whatever reason. It could be because something is happening in the news related to that. It could be because, it touches on an ongoing trend or development that people have just been aware of and thinking about for a little while. But to me, sometimes that's the part that's not really there in pitches that I see, where people, are really talking about a fascinating topic, but there's just not enough general broad interest in it to really make sense for us as a publication, although it might very well, be suited to a place that's a little bit more niche or specialized. So I think that's what you have to think about different in terms of, popular magazines and media that's written for the general public, is just trying to really make sure that you're, speaking to a topic or sharing something that would be of interest to a broader group of people.
That makes sense. How sometimes, I've read articles just as a general reader, and it's clear that the author is making that thing, but every now and then it's like, well, that's kind of a stretch. It's like, this is the 800th and 830th anniversary of someone. And so like when is there connection between one's research and a present day? When does it natural, and when is it like too much of a stretch? Or is there no such thing as too much of a stretch? If you can like somehow connect it, maybe you're sitting on a potential pitch. When you look at like the contemporaneousness of something, how do you judge that?
I mean, readers are smart, and if you're trying to stretch it too much, they're gonna kind of know that that's a stretch. So, I think sometimes if something is just really, really interesting, it will merit, a story or a piece on its own. And it, the peg to something that's happening today isn't quite as interesting, or as important. But more often than not, you do kind of need that in order for something to actually, get people's attention and be worth their time and energy reading it online when they have so many other options. So I think, more often than not, it's probably better to wait for those things that you do feel like are not as much of a stretch. You're probably going to have more success even if it means like pitching a little less often or just kind of biding your time until you see something that you really do feel like this is pretty clearly connected to the work that I'm doing. It's also timely, and there's a lot of broad interest in it at this moment. And once you start looking, I do think that happens kind of more often than you'd think. I know when you work in like a very specialized area, it might not feel like there's always some way of talking about it to a broader audience. But there's a lot of stuff going on. And I think the more you kind of think about your work in those terms, like the more connections you'll start to see to things that are happening, and the more confident you'll be in your ability to talk knowledgeably about a topic related to your research and in the context of what's going on like today in the world. And so I think, it's good to have that connection and not force it, because I do think readers will kind of pick up on that, and it might, kind of creates like a little bit of maybe a suspicion, or it's just not that appealing. So it's better to just wait for those connections when they're a little bit stronger. And I think once you start to do that, they will happen more often than you might initially realize.
So that brings up two questions. I mean, one is, besides the contemporaneousness of a moment, are there any other species of pegs that kind of merit, so besides seeing something which ties to current events, are there any other kinds of pegs that you as an editor are on the lookout for? That's one. And the other is actually thinking about the structure of a piece. Let's say, for simplicity's sake, imagine that a piece is like 15 paragraphs or 20 paragraphs. Is it fair to say that the peg part of, a pegged article is kind of, the peg is really like paragraph 1 and paragraph 20, but that those middle zones, you can really start to get, I'm an historian, so I can get into the thick of the history, and that's okay. I think some people are scared by the idea that, I've got to make this 20 paragraphs about the present day, and I don't work on that.
Yeah.
But maybe that's not really, maybe that's a false assumption. That's my take on it, but I don't know if that's accurate.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on the piece. Sometimes, your work is so timely and you've got some really relevant things to say, and you can actually do an entire piece that's very current, present day, of the moment thread throughout the entire piece. Other times it can just be, hey, here's this thing going on today. You might not know, like in your case, you might not know this entire backstory about where this idea has come from. Like we've actually recently published a piece along these lines about the metaverse, the concept of the metaverse. And certainly, obviously it's in the news, people are talking about it, that Meta has rebranded its entire company. So there's newsiness and there's timeliness. But the whole piece is actually a historical look back into earlier iterations of this and kind of where it came from and a lot of that context. And so most of the piece is not actually about what is happening today, but that is the in, and that is the way that you kind of introduce it to readers. And as far as the first part of your question, which was more about like what, are there other, if you don't have a pick, are there other things? I mean, there's certainly things that are like the most important thing is for a piece to be both interesting and important. And so a lot of times that is because it's relevant to something happening in the world today, but sometimes something is just so fascinating in its own right that it's worth a story. And I will say that when you're working on your research, you might feel it has to be like fascinating to other people too. I mean, many things are very fascinating, but I think fascination and relevance in other people's eyes can be a little bit higher bar there. So even if I find my work really fascinating, or you find yours really fascinating, editors are often, it may well be, but editors are often thinking about, will this appeal to other people? Will they be just as interested in it as a specialist in this field? But sometimes those ideas also certainly can get through because something is just so unknown or surprising or unexpected, or it's a different side of something. It's a different way of thinking about something than people are commonly thinking about a certain topic. So, that element of like, oh, this is a surprising perspective, or this is a different level of this trend that I didn't think of, or this is some unexpected information. Those can all, if there's no strong peg, those can also all really help a pitch or an idea get an editor's attention.
That makes sense. Yeah, and we as a, I'm not sure if it's unique to the profession, but there is a lot of like, this is the most important thing in the world. Listen to this. It's like, please stop. I really do care about 1623, but we've got to, but
yeah.
So, I mean, I think we cross paths, and I think it's fair to say I came on your radar because of social media, that there was something that I tweeted that people were interested in, and it was a surprise to me. And how important is, if I'm in the shoes of someone who's interested in pitching, but I just haven't gotten into the water, how important is it to have a social media presence in like today's publishing environment? Is it, does it give you a leg up? Is it, you take it or leave it? You know, how much should a person invest in their social media presence if they're interested in not just one-off, but maybe having a more regular life in writing for MIT Technology Review or comparable, you know, magazines and newspapers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of people do it in different ways. And I would kind of hate to tell someone you have to do this if people just don't want to be on social media. I completely understand that. And, you know, there's a lot of good reasons to like not want to spend a ton of your time on that. I do feel that it is helpful in many cases, especially for experts in different fields who want to have like a public conversation about their work and their field. I do think a lot of that is happening on social media, or social media can be a way to find opportunities like the way that you and I connected, where editors are looking for, you know, ideas, or you know, there's calls for pitches or ideas out there happening on Twitter that you might see if you weren't in those spaces. I mean, I don't think it's essential. I think there are other ways to have a public conversation and to be, you know, kind of a public scholar without necessarily needing to spend all day, every day on Twitter. And I think if you are motivated to not do that, then there are certainly other opportunities for you. I mean, a lot of publications do publish pitch guidelines. So you can search for those and like look around and see if you're an expert looking to pitch on a certain topic. You can see if they're op-ed or opinion piece of guidelines or expert authored guidelines for pitching. Like just look at the publications you'd like to write for and try to find those and go directly, you know, through that. Usually it's just sending an email to kind of let them know what your idea is. So there's other routes and other alternative ways to get in. I do think, yeah, social media, for better or worse, it can be quite helpful for building those connections and meeting people you might not have otherwise, especially once you're able to kind of like find the people on there who are active and sharing information that's useful to you. But of course, you know, everybody kind of should do what they think is what they think is best for them and works for themselves and you know, their own preferences too.
That makes sense. So I guess you mentioned the pitch guidelines, and maybe, you know, I want to respect your time. So maybe I'll say this is the last question, but the absolute no-nos of a pitch email, when you read one, is it, you know, a paragraph sort of gist? Is that what you're after? Do you want to see the piece? You know, and kind of how to craft a message like that. And then also from the perspective of the author, what's a reasonable amount of time to say, I'm gonna, you know, if you could let me know in a week or whatever, either way. And then, because if not, I'd like to maybe try pitching it somewhere else, but I don't want to do it simultaneously. What do you think are the kind of best practices that make you a little bit more inclined rather than less to at least read it, a pitch?
I mean, for me, the best thing that I can see in a pitch is a clear, like, sentence or two summarizing the argument that this piece will make. And I'm talking here mostly about op-ed pitches, where you're coming from a place of expertise, but you're not just providing a list of facts about something. You're actually using those facts to make an argument about, you know, what should be done or what isn't getting enough attention that should be getting enough attention. Or why this perspective is right or why that one is wrong. And so, you know, there's a lot of pitches I get that are sort of like, here's a summary of all the things you ever wanted to know about X topic, but it's not, you know, which is helpful, I'm sure, in some sense to some people, but I think, you know, it's not nearly as powerful as making an argument, a fact-based argument about something. And so right up top, just like a sentence or two about like, here's not just the information, but what it adds up to and what are the, you know, what's the analysis and the takeaway that I as an expert in this field can provide to you that you wouldn't have had if you just looked up all these individual facts on your own. Like that's the thing that I feel like is missing a lot of times from a pitch. And as far as, I'm very in favor of giving your editor a deadline. I think it's so helpful as an editor as well, because, you know, a lot of emails are coming at you and like there's a lot of editors trying to get back to people in a timely manner. But especially if you've got like a timely pitch, like I would absolutely, you know, you're trying to place this pitch, you've got your list of publications, you want to start at the top with like the ones that you'd be most excited to be in. If you pitch it and are like, this is obviously a timely pitch, love to place it with you, but if I don't hear back within 24 hours, if it's a really timely pitch, sometimes I've gotten like 3 hours if it's so timely, like to that day. But 24 or 48 hours, if I don't hear back from you in that time, I'm going to pitch it somewhere else. So like, that's fair game. Like, you've given them a deadline, and like, if they read that and don't, it'll either create a sense of urgency, like, I got to look at this, see if we want it, or it'll give you a free pass to like go and move on after 24 or 48 hours and not feel bad about like, ooh, what happens if they get back to me? Like, you were clear up front. If it's not a timely piece, I think a week is reasonable. Or, even like 10 days if you are really like, happy to give someone some time. And you can always follow up after like a week and say, I know it's been a week, I'll, give you one more week if I don't hear back. But I absolutely think that is that's not like, shouldn't feel bad about that at all. Like, it's actually very helpful for an editor, for somebody to be like kind of giving you deadlines, honestly, in some way. So that I always
comforting to hear. It's so comforting, because I remember the first time I ever wrote that, and it was because I got the guidance of someone who's a very long time writer, and I felt so like, will they think I'm a jerk? Like, this is very self-important of me.
I
but
know.
It seems as if it's like, oh no, that's just the way we talk, and that's okay. That's entirely reasonable.
Yeah, I understand that it might feel a little bit like you're not getting back to me in time, but honestly, it's really helpful. And you're not the only one who's ever done it to an editor. Like, people do it fairly often, and I always find it really helpful. So yeah, I think it helps both parties whenever you do that. Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank you again for taking out time. I know that my education in this was entirely sort of completely informal chats with a mentor of mine. And so I think this is going to help a lot of people who I imagine you always want more people in the pool.
Yes.
In terms of people, pitching you. And I just, off the top of my head, I can think it's like dozens of people who I don't believe have written, in this capacity, but would just make amazing authors. And hopefully maybe one or two of them will tip over into the pool and get involved. So thank you so much for taking out time for this.
Of course, that would be fantastic, and good to see you again, and happy to do it. Yeah, and good luck to everyone who gives it a shot.
Thanks a lot, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, thank you.